Welcome to Chautauqua People. My name is Ira Cooperman, and I'm sitting here with Warren L. Hickman, age 92 years young. Warren was born on April 2nd, 1921, in Eden, New York, not too far from the Chautauqua Institution, probably a little closer to Buffalo than you are to Chautauqua, right?
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, this year, 2013, is Warren's 85th year here at Chautauqua, right? Warren, what first brought you to the Chautauqua Institution?
My first trip here was when I was 5 years old. My father was quite interested in music, and John Philip Sousa had brought his band to Chautauqua, so we got into an ancient automobile and drove on the ancient roads all the way to Chautauqua. And I remember sitting on my father's shoulders to see over the crowd in order to see Sousa and his band.
About what year was that?
1926.
1926, wow. And then there were other visits to Chautauqua after that?
Yes, short visits until 1931, and after that we began coming for a longer time, and by 1933 we were coming for the season.
For the entire season?
Right.
And I understand that you've been to just about every concert that the Chautauqua Symphony Orchestra has played, is that right?
Well, while I was still working, I could only be here weekends, even though my family was here during the week. But after my wife passed on 24 years ago, I've only missed 2 concerts. Both of those were while I was in the hospital.
It's a great record. Now, when you came here early as a young man, what sort of organizations were you a member of at Chautauqua?
Well, I belonged to the Boys Club by the time I was 10 years old, and I later belonged to the High School Club when it was first year it got started, and then the College Club. And the College Club I will always remember because although I graduated from college before the war, I went back down to the College Club after the war, and there I met a very nice lady who became my wife.
That's great. So you met your wife at Chautauqua, and you were married. Were you married at Chautauqua also?
No, but we spent the season right after our honeymoon here because I was working at the Boys Club as a counselor.
As a counselor, yes. I think I've met some people on the grounds who have been very proud of the fact that you were their counselor, and they've gone on to do other things like be president of the Alumni Association of CLSC, things like that. Yeah. So you have been here a long time. And what about your family? Has your family also followed in your footsteps?
Well, my father and mother really received the equivalent of a college education here because they attended more than 1,000 lectures in the amphitheater. And in those days, the lecturer lectured 5 days on a subject, and there were the top professors and government officials from various areas. And so in political science, psychology, literature, so on, they were not only exposed, but they learned more in depth. And they attended probably 600 symphony concerts.
Wow. And what about your children?
Well, my children came here. In fact, my son arrived here with us when he was less than a year old, and my daughter the same way. And both of them belonged to the Boys or Girls Club. My daughter eventually became a counselor at the Girls Club. My son began working on the amphitheater stage crew, and then they've come back with their families when they could, and my grandchildren love the place, but at that point in their careers where it's very difficult for them to get here.
Sure. How many grandchildren do you have?
Only 3.
Only 3. That's still pretty good. And do they sometimes, the grandsons sometimes do come back to Chautauqua, right?
Yes. In fact, so do some other relatives. I have a niece and her husband who will be staying with me for a few days in August. my father used to invite the family here for the summer, and my sister and her husband, who was a doctor, enjoyed it. They brought their families, and on Fridays, after I would give the weekly news analysis, we would all get together at a long table at one of the restaurants in Chautauqua, and that way the family saw each other, cousins and nieces and so
great.
on, for 8 weeks in those days.
So Chautauqua is a place for families to sort of get together. That's
Yes,
wonderful.
not only families but friends. I have frequent dinners with friends that I met when I was about 12 years old, and they're still coming to Chautauqua. They now live in Florida and Arizona, Alabama, California, and the only time I ever see them is when I come to Chautauqua.
Right. It's great to have Chautauqua friends, isn't it? Look forward every summer to seeing them again.
Yes, that's part of what I enjoy about Chautauqua.
I agree.
But I must say the symphony orchestra captures my heart.
Yes. Well, music is very important at Chautauqua, no question. You mentioned before about doing news analysis. I know you've spoken at the Hall of Missions, you've spoken at the Hall of Philosophy, and even on the main stage, on the stage of the amphitheater. You've done book reviews, you've given analysis of what's going on in the world. What was it like back then in the 50s and 60s and 70s when you were doing these things? This is how people got most of their news?
Well, very few people had television sets at Chautauqua, and even if they did, they were doing other things. In Chautauqua, it's difficult to just sit around in front of a television set. And I know the president at that time was concerned that everybody could find news someplace else, that perhaps we didn't need a news analysis, but there was still a clamor for it, and so it went on for several years.
That's
It
great.
always followed the Friday lecture in the amphitheater.
I see. And you've done some kind of famous news analysis or famous lectures. I know that once you substituted for somebody kind of famous on ABC TV News. Is that right?
Yeah, it was Sam Donaldson and Ted Couple were to give a series, Sam, for 2 days, and he called in on Thursday of the week before he was to arrive. He was to be the Monday, Tuesday lecture, and said that ABC had said he had to be at the Democratic Convention, and they asked me if I could come in and substitute for him. Kind of a rush job because I got word about 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon to speak on Monday and Tuesday.
I don't know why ABC thought that the Democratic National Convention was more important than speaking at Chautauqua. Gee. But I'm sure you did fine. I'm sure you did fine. And what were some of your favorite things back then that you were very active, I know, at Chautauqua in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. What were some of the things you liked to do the most at Chautauqua?
Well, I loved to play golf, but I must say that people watching me wondered, what's that guy doing, the spring plowing? I was a lousy golfer, but I had fun at it. I liked to sail, and when I had a busy week and came up here on a weekend to meet the family, I always liked to get in a boat and go out and troll for muskies. Quiet, and sometimes you almost hoped they wouldn't strike. But I remember the first muskie I ever caught and how it just stood up out of the water like you see pictures of salmon when they're hooked.
That's great.
Smithsonian Institute says that the Chautauqua muskellunge is the fightingest fish on the North American continent. And I believe it because about a third of the times I caught one, they took the tackle, they won the fight.
That's very good. Now, I know you still keep active today, even at age 92. What keeps you active at Chautauqua these days?
Well, as far as physical lawn bowling, English lawn bowling, which is very challenging. As you know, the bowl, unlike a ball, is a little larger on one side than the other, and as a result will curve up to 6 feet. And so it is a challenging game, and I enjoy it thoroughly. And I enjoy the fellowship because no matter where you lone bowl in the world, the moment you step on a bowling green, everybody treats you like a friend. And you cheer for the opponent's shot just as much as for your own. It's one of the few sports where you can lose and feel you had just as good a time as if you won.
That's great. That's great. Now, I know you do other things at Chautauqua, too. What do you do Sunday mornings?
Oh, for the last 29 years, I've been an usher at the church service.
That's pretty good. Is that the Presbyterian service or the
No,
just
that's the
Sunday morning?
amphitheater service.
The amphitheater Sunday morning service. That's great. That's great. What are besides lawn bowling and besides ushering? What are some of the other things that you enjoy doing these days at Chautauqua? Because I know I see you in the amphitheater a lot.
Well, I enjoy, as I said before, the symphony.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy opera. I enjoy the lake. I enjoy my bowling. I had to give up the golf about 4 years ago, and I have given up trying to catch a muskie because I used to do it from a outboard and all by myself, and today I'd need somebody else to be the crew.
Right. No, I understand. Well, I understand that the only time that you were not able to be at Chautauqua in the last several years was when you were in the Army in World War II from
Well, that wouldn't be the last several years. That's quite a while back now.
I guess you're right. 1943, 1945. Right. So you've really been at Chautauqua pretty much consistently since 1945, right?
Yes, in fact, since 1931, except for those 3 years.
So since 1931, that's quite a record. What about your experiences in World War II? I know that you had some musical experiences. You came out of college playing, what was it, the flute?
Yes, I was principal flute at Colgate, and what they then called a symphony orchestra, although we were pitifully small to be a symphony.
Right. But you didn't end up playing in a band in the Army, did you?
No. I had some interesting experience in that I'd been an undefeated lightweight boxing
A boxer
at Colgate, and when I arrived at Fort Niagara, somehow they got the records and they wanted me to stay there for the duration on a boxing team, and in those days, and it's hard to explain today, but in those days, most of us were gung-ho to get into the Army, and we enlisted and were chomping at the bit, and I said no, and I went on to Fort Bragg for basic training, and there at the end of training, they somehow or other found out I'd played the flute and wanted me to stay in the ceremonial band, but they had to explain again that I wanted to get overseas. I was anxious to get into combat at that time.
So did you finally get over to Europe? Did you finally get overseas?
Yeah, I arrived in England at the end of November in 1943.
And where were you assigned in 1943?
They sent me to London to work at Cossack, which was Chief of Staff to the Supreme Allied Commander, although at that time Supreme Commander had not been appointed. And about 6 weeks later, somewhere around February, General Eisenhower arrived, and we changed the name from Cossack to SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force.
Right. And you were actually on General Eisenhower's staff, were you not?
Yes, in a sense, within SHAEF there were divisions, G1, G2, G3, G4, engineers, so on. And I was with one of the divisions that was, there were the general divisions and there were the special divisions, and was in one of those special divisions. And I was told to establish a filing system for top secret files and for British bigot files, and to run it, and I did.
Was there some special skill that you had that they thought you would be especially good for keeping the top secret files of the Army?
I suppose because I have a photographic memory.
Uh-huh.
I can still tell you on what page of a certain document I read something back in 1944 or 45.
I think two of the things that most interest me about you is the fact that you have this photographic memory and the fact that you were born at home. You weren't born in a hospital in 1921.
Nobody that I know of was born in a hospital back in 1921.
Yeah, I think that says a lot about your history. I must say I really enjoy seeing you at Chautauqua, because I tell people every time I see you there that you are history, that by your being there and so many other people who served, who were alive at least during World War II, and especially who served during World War II, we owe you a lot. What were some of the experiences that you had that you probably will never forget during World War II when you were in the Army in Europe?
Well, about 4 months after I had been assigned to SHAFE, I put in for transfer to the 82nd Airborne, and they went to they tried to talk me out of it, but eventually they went to the extreme of sending the request on, and about 3 weeks later I got a sheaf back about that thick, and it had an endorsement from G1 and G2, G3, so on. But at the 82nd Airborne, they said they had no opening at this point for somebody who was my particular rank.
And the 82nd Airborne, these were parachuters, right? These guys parachuted into Europe, the 82nd Airborne?
Mm-hmm.
But did you...
I went in to see the executive officer and said,
Right.
Can you put this through a second time? I didn't ask to get transferred in rank, and I've got to go to jump school here in England.
Right.
And time's running out because I knew where and when the invasion was coming off. And so he finally said, well, Warren, we thought this would satisfy you, but you can never be sent where you could become a prisoner of war. And until then, I hadn't realized that what I knew, because I had to read over the years some 28 to 30,000 documents of various types, and with a photographic memory, they just didn't want me to
get captured.
Take a chance of getting captured.
Right. I mean, you were reading top secret documents, so yeah, that must have been an exciting time. Well, you finally did get out of the Army, and you ended up going back to your academic career. You had gotten a bachelor's degree from Colgate, and you had done graduate work and got a master's degree from Columbia University. And then you, after World War II, you decided to stay in Europe and go to the University of Geneva in Switzerland.
No, I come back, met my wife, and then decided to accept a fellowship to the Graduate Institute of International Studies at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. And it was a very interesting experience because that particular institute trains diplomats from countries around the world. And
Right.
so every seminar meant that you were going to hear somebody from a different country who was either already a diplomat or was getting ready to be one.
Mm-hmm. And you earned a doctorate in political science, is that right?
Well, that's what they call it, Doctor Science Politique, with a major in international relations.
International relations, very good. And then when you came back after you received your doctorate, where did you start your academic career as a professor?
I ended up, or started, at Ohio Northern University, and I was there for 5 years. But the second year I was there, I had been chairing the economics department, and second year the dean of the university, which is the equivalent of a provost, he had the 4 academic deans, law, engineering, pharmacy, and liberal arts, reporting to him, died. But while he was in the hospital, before he died, he told the president and chairman of the board that this young upstart should become the new provost. So
Wow.
I ended up dean of the university for 3 years before I took the opportunity to come to Ithaca College, which got me closer to my family and my wife's family. She was from Pittsburgh, and we got back to the Finger Lakes region, and I was there for 9 years, and then eventually went to Syracuse University, Maxwell Graduate School, to co-chair a doctoral program, and from there to a new college that was getting started, Eisenhower College, as vice president for academic affairs. But I always insisted that the registrar list me for one course, and I always taught a course, either in American diplomatic history or a course I called War and Crises, a full-year course on the two world wars.
Yeah, and War and Crisis is also the title of your new book. War and Crisis is quite a book. That it's actually 2 volumes, and its title is War and Crisis, 1914 and 1948. The Road to Free Trade. It's an amazing book, which is available at the Chautauqua bookstore. And if I could turn it around a little bit so you'll see the entire cover. This took you quite a long time to do these 2 volumes, and I think it's a total of over 1,400 pages in the book, if I recall correctly.
Well, I had researched for my master's at Columbia on Hoover's relief program during the First World War. And I did my doctoral dissertation on the genesis of the European Recovery Program after the war. And I began tying these ideas back and forth, tying them together, especially when I taught a class in War and Crises. And finally, in the 80s, I took all the notes that I had accumulated for some 40 years and started putting them together. My wife was typing on one of the earliest computers, sort of a monstrosity, and I was typing on a typewriter, and I would type and correct things on that I had done and hand it to her, and she would do the final draft. And she was a good editor as well. But we got 22 chapters done when they informed her that she had terminal cancer and would die from it. So I said, that's it. Let's forget the book and just enjoy it. And
sure.
It was not, that was about, she died in '89, and it was sometime in the mid-'90s that
You came back to
I
it?
decided I could once again tackle it. So in actual years of writing it, probably not more than 4, but in terms of researching it and getting the notes for it, probably 45 years.
Wow. Well, we're glad that you came back to it. It's really quite a good book. So you had quite an academic career after Chautauqua, being a college professor, being a dean, being the vice president for academic affairs and dean of the faculty at Eisenhower College. And then you ended up at Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York. What did you do there at RIT?
Well, at that time, I stepped out of administration in order to do what I wanted and teach full-time.
Good.
And had a string of seminars as well as some regular classes. And I was able to do it in my field, which
That's
was
great.
in some ways more a pleasure than work.
I'll bet. So you retired as a professor emeritus at RIT. That was your last
Yes.
official position, right? And since then, you've been coming back to Chautauqua and just enjoying the summers here, right?
Yes. In fact, one of my problems is that I find Chautauqua addictive. Once you've come here for any length of time, you can't help but come back again.
I agree. Well, let me summarize by just saying that you've had an extraordinary life, really, and everyone at Chautauqua is really proud of you. I'm really happy to have you in my classes, and I would just like to ask you one last question, and that is, how would you describe the influence that Chautauqua has had in your life? I mean, Chautauqua has meant a lot to you, I know.
In several ways. There are the enduring friendships. It's hard to describe what you get from Chautauqua. I look forward to it from about Christmas time on. I get anxious to get back to Chautauqua. The ambience is tremendous, and then there are so many things to learn every summer, and I go back with a feeling of peace. And once I was on the Board of Trustees here, and I learned a great deal about the operation of the institution, and as a result, I also have great respect for the current trustees and the administration, people like Tom Becker, Jeff Follansby. They do a very fine job, and I like the idea that they never attack a capital campaign for or capital building of any kind until they have the cash in hand.
Right.
It's very well run, and I had a chance to see that from the inside in the 8 years I was on the board,
Right.
especially the 2 years when I chaired the executive committee.
Well, Warren, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I know everyone watching this is going to appreciate it too. You've been watching Chautauqua People, and our special guest has been Warren L. Hickman, a young man, aged 92. We've enjoyed this, and I hope you've enjoyed it too. Thank you very much.